doesn't really matter which industry or job role you're performing. It really is looking at the mechanics of how we can actually clean up the body of content and make those messages clearer for your audience. As in the course, we learned things like assertion-evidence, redundancy, and duplication. And we're going to apply some of those mechanics to these next few slides. So let's take a look at this very first one. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of text inside of there. Now, this would be great for a report document, but it's very heavy reading when you're doing a presentation, especially for your audience. Now, if we start to look at it and break it down, what can we begin to clean up or remove? Now, remember, when you do slides, it's not just do it once and then move on to the next one. You'll have to review and edit and refine several times to get to the one that you want. Now, if we look at the top part, we got common pain points with sales trader role. Then underneath there, we have a more complete message. Now, if I just look at that message to begin with, the role of the sales organization is evolving as clients continue. Honestly, a lot of that very first sentence is what I would actually present. I would actually remove it from this message. Let's have a look at some of the redundancy that we can find first of all. Now, pain points is actually repeated several times throughout this presentation as with sales team, so we want to remove those. Ultimately, if we really focus in on what it's trying to say, it's talking about the pain points for the sales teams are highlighted by siloed sales teams, manual processes, legacy trading systems. One more interesting point to note was in the delivery, it was highlighted personal relationships was one of the key pain points, but it's actually not mentioned in the message. In fact, if you need to find it, you'd have to look under the people section about the 5th bullet point down. So we definitely need to refocus that and highlight it back in the key message. Now, if we just simply remove some of the basic redundancies or duplication there, this is what we're left with. Now, we still haven't arrived at the final message yet, and there's a lot more cleaning up to be done. Now, again, we realize we're talking about pain points, so I'm going to make that the focus of the message. So I'm going to just re-edit that sentence a little bit. So I'm going to highlight the pain points for the sales team first, and then what are those pain points a little bit more clearly. Now, one of the things to note in the body of content, you'll notice all the bold text. Now, the bold text is kind of written into the sentences. Just for formatting and just for reading purposes, I want to make sure all the bold text is the very first thing that your audience actually see. In looking at it further, so then my internal dialogue starts to kick in a little bit. And then I start to look at the different kind of text that we have there. Now, everything in bold is really what we want to highlight to the audience, but it's kind of written into the sentence. And so maybe you're on the second sentence and then it gets bolded because that's the most important thing. And when we're looking at the most important thing, we've already mentioned that it is pain points. But when I read through it, it may read like they're benefits or value statements rather than pain points. As one quick example, under the people section, cross-selling opportunities is bold, but that reads more like a benefit statement rather than a pain point. If we were looking at the pain point, it would probably be limited communication. So we just need to read through it and just ensure and check that everything really is a pain point rather than a benefit statement. So once again, we've gone for our third review, our third edit. So we've cleaned up the message here. So common pain points for sales teams that reduce effectiveness and revenue opportunities consist of, and then very clearly on that second sentence, all the pain points. So there's 4 pain points there. As for the body of content, all those bold statements are now sort of highlighted on top. So the formatting is now nice and consistent. But my internal dialogue is still sort of itching away. And does it match the brand guidelines? Well, to some degree, yes, but some of the colors like the blue may not completely conform to the brand guidelines there, and we might just need to change that. Now, as I said, there's still a little bit too much to read in a presentation context. For a report, it's fine. I'd really only take the things which were in bold. Anything which was just underneath it, I would probably deliver and give us further examples. If the audience needed more of this, I would give them a separate document in terms of notes or a more fully fleshed out slide where they could read it in their own time. So how could we design this further? So I've opted for a diagram approach here. So the sales team's pain points clearly in the middle with the 4 pain points around them. Then all of those bold bold points that we saw before, we just highlighted in each of those category boxes next to their key point inside of there. So in looking at these two slides, which do you think would make a better presentation slide? Now, how many of you have seen these types of slides in your workplace, where you've got your charts and text and sort of messages on top? Now, regardless of the industry or job that you may be doing inside of there, one thing should be a general rule of thumb for everyone to abide by. And that is, every audience member, regardless of their knowledge level, should be able to understand the gist of the message that you're trying to put across. Now, in this case, when we look at it, we want to apply the mechanisms that we've learned in our content exercises to this chart and to this text and to this message. That means our assertion evidence, looking at duplication, looking at things like redundancy. So the first thing I'll look at is really the message that they try to put across there. Now, one thing you'll note in all industries is everyone will have their own abbreviations or short forms of things. And it's true in this slide here. But when we look at it, we can see compliance in week 35 is 91%. There is a chart underneath, and that verifies that 91% was reached in week 35, although it's not labeled on the actual chart there. Now, it's great that it was in week 35 because in week 34, it was only 86%. So lucky they reported it in that week. Now, to be fair, if I look way down there, the target was actually 93%. So we're still below target, but that's not indicated in terms of the messaging. And a lot of messaging comes down to the way that you actually want to frame it. And framing it does depend on sometimes who your audience may be, which we won't cover too much for this particular preview. So nonetheless, if we look at the target 93%, could we incorporate that into the chart? Then we wouldn't need that text box. Is there another way of reflecting our results? Could we show what was the average or percentage increase, since we obviously started measuring this in week 22, which again is highlighted in the text box there. So let's get rid of all the redundancy. You can see compliance, or EAWB compliance, is repeated several times. Next steps, we can get rid of that. And there are some things that you would say verbally in the presentation that also just don't need to be in the text boxes. Then of course my internal dialogue kicks in a little bit more because we keep examining this slide in order to do a slightly better version. Now in the chart on top, we can see that it starts from a 0 scale. Now there's a kind of golden rule that all charts must start from 0, but that's not absolutely true, especially for line charts. If the movements are very marginal, it can be very difficult to see individual patterns. So in this case, we might start from a different scale, which does not start from 0. On the chart below, there's a lot of things wrong with it. It's very difficult to see the individual data inside of there. If I look back at the text box, it says the high share of EAP1 and 3 have the most errors. Now, if I can see the legend for EAP3 on the bottom chart, it's clearly the highest one there. That is easy to see. But as for the rest of them, EA1, is very difficult to see. It's hidden amongst all those lines of data inside of there. And do we need those legends? Do we need all those colors? Do the colors have any data representation? So there's a lot of things we can do to that chart to make it a little bit clearer. As for the remaining text, it looks okay, but we can definitely break it down. And in fact, some of it we can incorporate back into the chart. If you look at the text box under past activities, so active analysis started on week 21 with effects shown in week 22. Actually, we can incorporate that very clearly in the chart. And the last bit of internal dialogue is, in rewriting the message and trying to make it clearer, I always want to retain some kind of key metric. No matter what message I'm doing, not all will have numbers inside of there, but where I can put a number, I will try my best. Audiences like to qualify and quantify things. And so having a number really best does that job. The rest of it is really just cleaning it up and just abiding by whatever brand guidelines the company may have. So in this revised version, you can see pretty much all the text is completely gone. Why? Because we've incorporated a lot of it into the key message and a lot more into the charts themselves. So in that key message now, we got an X% increase of compliance demonstrates a visible impact after the show in week 21, with EAP3 still a continued focus to reduce non-compliance errors. And so if we look at the first chart on the left, so we've included a few more elements inside of there. So clearly we can see 91% again back at week 35. We can see we started at week 21 with a little call out showing our monitoring has started then, and that was at 73%. So we can calculate the rise very easily. In that period of time as well, we also know the average was about 88%. But more importantly, we've also got the target dictated in there as well, which is 93%. You'll also notice on the Y scale, we haven't started at 0. And so we can see the patterns of change a little bit more clearly. So the chart on the left, you can see we actually don't have one chart anymore. We now have 6. And it kind of defies logic when you tell most people, I want 6 charts rather than 1, because the first notion is it's going to be a little bit more crowded. But if you can actually break up the data and it's easier to see, and in this case it's all on the same scaling anyway, we can definitely see the movements of each of those indicators a little bit more clearly here. The only one we've color coded was EAP3 because that has the highest non-compliance errors, and obviously we want to highlight to your audience. So between the two, which do you think has a cleaner, clearer message, and which one highlights that message more clearly in terms of the evidence that's been presented, in this case with charts? So between the two, which do you think would make a better presentation slide? Now you're definitely going to see many slides like this within your organization, which are really just very basic kind of text slides against a white background. Very common slide. But in this case, we can just apply simple things like redundancy and duplication to cut down a lot of this text. Again, we got a classic title label on top, blockchain technology, but it's not very clear in terms of what you're actually trying to say about blockchain technology. And so then we have all the body of text trying to go into more detail about what it is. So remember, when you write your slides, we want one clear message on top. So we want a nice, clean, clear message header. So let's go through it and just remove any redundancy and duplication. Because as we discovered in the course, this ultimately doesn't add value to your audience and ultimately just wastes their time reading it. Now, the fact is, blockchain technology is repeated several times throughout those key points, so we don't need to keep repeating it over and over and over. In fact, if you start to read through this slide, there are many things that you just don't need inside of there. A lot of it can be presented. So this is the challenge for most presenters. What really needs to be behind them on the slide, and what is it that they're actually going to say? Whatever behind you is on the slide should be concrete. Now, the other things that we've actually removed in terms of repetition are things like web developer, that's been repeated several times. To secure websites and mobile applications, that's been repeated several times. So the word security and so on has been repeated quite a few times inside of there. So if we start to break it down in terms of what are we actually looking for in terms of the message, as I said, when we start to remove a lot of repetition, it actually gets highlighted in terms of what it is you're trying to say. So blockchain technology is to secure websites and mobile applications. It's a powerful technology used by web developers. That really is your message. And so let's just cut it down to rewrite the message first. So here is our message. Blockchain technology is a powerful web developer tool used to secure web and mobile applications. The text that you see below is just the raw text that we've used after just removing a lot of the repetition. But we need to clean it up for the last time. And in fact, if you look at it, it's just highlighting the industries that it's in. So for the final edit, this is what it's going to look like. So here we've used a little bit more of their brand guidelines and their brand design style. So we have a picture on the right hand side and the message is on the left with a few of those industries listed. Bullet points are still okay. Bullet points, like anything else, is just a tool, and it's about using the right tool for the right job. Sometimes it's bullet points, sometimes it's charts, sometimes it's tables and videos and images and so on. So here we have a nice, clean, very simple slide. Audiences can read it quite quickly and turn their attention back to the presenter. So once again, between the two, which do you think would make a better presentation slide? Now, obviously in the year 2020, we have the COVID-19 situation. As a result of that, we see many webinars now appearing online, and as a consequence of the tools or platforms they're using, one unfortunate result of that is the webcam. Now, the webcam typically sometimes appears and it covers the messages or it covers the key content you're actually trying to show your audience, as we have in the case here. Now, this is actually a slide from Deloitte. And it's not a bad slide in terms of the information. There's not a lot inside of there. It may look like a lot, but the key points are kind of nice and tight. But can we clean it up a little bit more? Well, the first thing I can do is remove, again, some of the repetition and some of the redundancy that we see there. So we see the word captives repeated quite a few times, key insights inside of there. Definitely we don't want the webcam covering the message. You can see within the charts we've got month for crisis, month for crisis. We can probably short form all of that in a slightly different way. Now, the other thing we need to do is actually just make it a little bit more readable. As with other examples, we've got key points in bold, and we will just want to maybe front load those or make sure those bold portions are easier to see for your audience. So in the revised version, we've just done a couple of different things here, taking into account that we know that we're doing a webinar and we're going to have that webcam picture inside of there. So things like page number and copyright, which are usually at the bottom, we've now brought it to the top. So we're going to allocate that space for your webcam. The message now is nice and clean. It's nice and clear. We're also using a black background because it's just easier to read the content, especially on a screen. The charts we really haven't had to do too much with. They're pretty much okay. The only thing we've done is clean up crisis number of months rather than crisis month, crisis month. So we removed the repetition. We've also numbered the points as well under each section, because when you're delivering a webinar, unlike a physical presentation, you can use a pointer or just use your hand to point to certain key points. When you just say, if you look at the point under the chart, most people don't know what point you're looking at. So it's always very good to label them. In this case, we've just used a numerical system like 1, 2, and 3. And so we got our charts labeled and our source notes are still there underneath. So between these two slides, if this was a webinar, which one would you prefer to see?